All right, we have some major developments. Epstein's survivors are now compiling their own list. That is right. A press conference that was held today in D.C. could very well change the national conversation surrounding the still quite mysterious Jeffrey Epstein case. We had a press conference that was organized by a bipartisan committee. On screen now, you see Representative Ro Khanna and Representative Thomas Massie, a Democrat and a Republican, who came together to organize this event. Epstein survivors came out very, very bravely, and they told their own story. You know, before we talk about the list that they are compiling, before we talk about the fact that these representatives promised to read this list on the House floor, we'll get there. I just want to say, listening to this press conference today, I listened to basically all of it, and it really just put into perspective how these women have been through complete hell. And I'm not even talking about when they were young girls and they were abused. Of course, that is absolutely terrible. But what's happened in the decades since is like a living hell. They've had to go through decades of bureaucratic cover-up, corruption, failure to investigate, neglect, interests trying to sway politicians to intentionally ignore them and not investigate what happened to them, over and over, just desperately trying to be heard. So I know a lot of the times the national conversation centers around the context of this current administration, and for a good reason. Donald Trump today in the Oval Office, while this presser was being held outside, said that this was a hoax. The current president is so deeply entrenched that he can't stop himself from sounding guilty. So a lot of the times, the national conversation around Epstein survivors, we revolved around this current administration. But just to zoom out, there have been decades long of neglect. Institutions should have been protecting these victims. And again, a lot of the abuse that happened in the early 2000s was briefly investigated. It was investigated in Florida, but Alex Acosta, at the time, dropped it. He let Epstein get away with this sweetheart plea deal. Then Trump put Alexander Acosta in his administration a decade later after Epstein had been allowed to re-abuse. So again, at this press conference, there was a lot of incredible moments of people telling their story and telling their story of resilience as well. Even though a lot of the stories were heartbreaking, there was a lot of resilience. All of that being said, some of the announcements made are very, very key. Just to start off, Epstein survivor Annie Farmer described how all of the survivors were both horrified and just disgusted to learn that Ghislaine Maxwell had been transferred from a high security prison to a more lax minimum security prison directly after meeting with Donald Trump's personal lawyer turned Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche. She said, "We were horrified to learn that she had been transferred to a prison camp. She is someone who's been found guilty by a jury of sex trafficking." She then lied about it. "She participated in the abuse. She was a major architect of the scheme. The fact that she's painted herself as a victim is disgusting." Now let's play this clip of Epstein survivor Lisa Phillips talking about the list that they're compiling.
I would like to announce here today, us Epstein survivors have been discussing creating our own list. We know the names. Many of us were abused by them. Now together as survivors, we will confidentially compile the names we all know who were regularly in the Epstein world. And it will be done by survivors and for survivors. No one else is involved. Stay tuned for more details.
No one else is involved, and we'll continue to cover this. As she was saying that, as Lisa Phillips was out there talking about this, Donald Trump was inside the Oval Office, and he was calling this a Democratic hoax.
There have been survivors of Jeffrey Epstein speaking at a press conference on Capitol Hill. They're calling for these case files, these documents to be released. And Thomas Massie, who was sponsoring a discharge position to get the House to vote on releasing those documents, says he doesn't believe you're implicated in these files, but many of your friends and donors may be, and he says that's why the Justice Department is redacting them and slow-walking the release. Is the Justice Department protecting any friends or donors, sir?
So this is a Democrat hoax that never ends. You know, it reminds me a little of the Kennedy situation. We gave him everything over and over again, more and more and more. and nobody's ever satisfied. From what I understand, I could check, but from what I understand, thousands of pages of documents have been given. But it's really a Democrat hoax because they're trying to get people to talk about something that's totally irrelevant to the success that we've had as a nation since I've been president. Even if you look at D.C. right now, D.C.
All right, just think about the framework that I was talking about earlier in the video, when I was saying that even if we look at it in the context of this current administration, we can still zoom out and see that these women have been neglected for years. It takes so much courage to come out and to fight and to try to hold the people accountable that did this to you, yet over and over and over, they were dismissed with a cruel level of disregard. Now we can zoom back into this administration and see that Donald Trump is not only continuing to perpetuate this level of disregard and dismissiveness, but it's a whole new level of just almost spite for the victims, spite for the fact that women dare to speak out against their abusers, people who ruined them during their most formative years, who traumatized them. Donald Trump is calling it a Democratic hoax. It's not just disregard, it's redirection of all of this. I want to show you then Representative Thomas Massie and Representative Ro Khanna went on CNN and declared that they will read this list on the House floor if the Epstein survivors compile it.
Women today, one thing that they said that they are willing to do if these documents don't get released is compile their own, basically, list of people around Jeffrey Epstein and release that. You actually said tonight that you have a plan to potentially help them with that.
Yeah, so the survivors said that they had decided to compile their own list, but the reality is if they try to release that list, they're going to be sued into homelessness. They will be attacked. They will have death threats. And so what my colleague Marjorie Taylor Greene volunteered to do, and I've volunteered to do as well, is to read that list on the floor of the House of Representatives, because our founders put into the Constitution speech or debate immunity, which says that we can't be prosecuted for what we say on the floor of the House. So we're willing to help those survivors get those names out there. And as my colleague Ro Khanna has said, we trust the public to determine who were donors to the Epstein Scholarship Fund and who were users of the women who were exposed to sexual abuse, to differentiate between those two groups of people.
Congressman Khanna, do you support that, reading the names from these women on the House floor?
I do, but I don't think it needs to come to that. I mean, there shouldn't be burdened to have to come up with the list. You know, one of the things that struck me is some of the survivors said that they themselves had not seen the files. One person pleaded with America saying she wants to try to understand her own memories and she wants to see these files to be able to piece that together. Look, this was such an emotional moment that after I spoke, after the survivors, Marjorie Taylor Greene came over and gave me a hug. I mean, people should have seen the humanity there. And I don't know, after hearing those women, why we just don't release the files. I mean, it actually would make the president look good. He could come out and say, no other president has released the files. I'm releasing the files. My focus right now, and I think anyone who was at that press conference, is how do we get justice and closure for those survivors?
Very well said, and I'm trying to recenter this conversation mainly around the survivors because that's what's truly important today. Finally, let's watch survivor Lisa Phillips, who announced the list that they're creating earlier, go on CNN and close off the day with more announcements. Really quickly, when Ro Khanna said that Marjorie Taylor Greene hugged him, it reminded me of this Lord of the Rings meme. Do you remember this moment where they're like, I never thought I'd see the day where I'm fighting side by side with an elf, or something like that. That's what it feels like at this moment. Like we're fighting side by side with Marjorie Taylor Greene. I guess when the vast majority of people in Congress are okay being complicit, then you don't get picky with your allies, right?
Lisa, I appreciate you being with us, both of you being with us. You heard the president call this a Democrat hoax that never ends. What did you think when you hear that?
For me personally, it was shocking and upsetting. I couldn't believe that he said that. Just for so many years, he acknowledged that there were thousands of files and he was going to release them. And so hearing that today, I was just confused by it. I think he thought that we were targeting him, and we weren't. I don't believe there's any evidence that he abused any of the survivors. So it wasn't a target against him. It was just, a cry for us being fed up and wanting answers.
What's the impact been on your life? I mean, how are you holding up through this? Not just in recent months, but I mean, this is obviously going on for many years.
Well, it comes in waves. It's hard to deal with because we just want some accountability, and we haven't received any. The only person that's been held accountable is a woman, and we were abused by a man who sex trafficked a lot of us. And so we are aware there are many other men out there, and we just don't understand, or we are nearing the end of our fight, pushing us to, make other decisions, to see if we can get some accountability.
Brad, I'm wondering what your reaction to the president calling a hoax.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Anderson. It doesn't make any sense. I don't think, I know that he doesn't believe that it's a hoax. I'm not sure that he knows what the word hoax means, to tell you the truth, because I've talked to President Trump years ago about this case on this topic. He provided information. He knew back then the type of creep that Jeffrey Epstein was. I can't imagine that he's saying that these hundreds of women are lying about this, so I'm not exactly
This
sure
was
what
back
he's
in
talking
2009, about. You said you talked to him.
Sure, I talked to him in 2009 several times back then, and at least through the years have even asked follow-up questions through his lawyers. He's not implicated in the files that I've ever seen, and like I've said, I've represented 200 women. So all I can think is that he has now seen the files or has been advised of things in the files that he didn't know was in the files and that I currently don't know that are in the files, because otherwise it makes absolutely no sense, this about face that he's done. You're either on the side of the victims or you're on the side of evil. There is not another side to this. And he's choosing the side of evil, the side of Jeffrey Epstein. It really makes no sense. I can't imagine the public's going to put up with this.
Lisa, you said this on Capitol Hill, and you just sort of referenced it a moment ago. You talked about compiling a list of other abusers who were in Epstein's world among all of the women who are there today, and I assume others who weren't even there. Is that something, can you just talk about that idea, and what would you do with that list?
Well, I started a podcast about a year ago where I speak to survivors of serial predators. So I'm aware through that, and also for the last 20 years, speaking to survivors of Epstein, that they were trafficked to other men. So I think the smartest thing for us to do is to get together and start putting together the names that we know 100% that we were trafficked to or abused by, or friends of ours were.
And what would you do with that? Go ahead.
Well, it's just for us to be aware of what's going on.
Is that something you would release publicly?
We have many people that are working with us that are allies in media and in different groups, and we're not quite sure. It's not up for us really to release those names. It's really up to the government to release those names.
Obviously, the Epstein survivors have to be careful going on TV saying we're going to release the names. But what you can see is Lisa Phillips said we are going to compile a list. Then Representative Thomas Massie and Representative Ro Khanna said we will read the list in a setting where we are not legally culpable at all. So I'm going to leave it there. If you appreciate these videos, drop a like, subscribe. I'll see you all in the next one. Peace out.